Anthropic built a hidden handicap into Claude Fable 5 and then walked it back after researchers caught it. Yesterday's episode covered the Fable and Mythos split release, so I'm not going to replay the whole release, but the new fact is sharper here. Fable 5 was silently degrading its own performance for people working on rival AI systems. So not refusing, and there was no warning, it was simply giving worse answers without telling the person at the keyboard. And Anthropic later confirmed the behavior. And after the backlash, the company apologized to Wired. The line was, "We made the wrong trade-off, and we apologize for not getting the balance right." Anthropic said also that future safeguards around frontier AI development will be visible. The system will alert people when a request is refused or rerouted for that reason. And that visibility is a real change. A visible refusal can actually be seen and debated, while a hidden downgrade turns the model into a black box with a trapdoor. Anthropic described the hidden handicap as a safety measure. The company tied it to a concern that AI could improve its own capabilities faster than society adapts. And that is Anthropic's framing, and it very much mirrors their recent paper. But the evidence also shows a lab protecting the frontier from the people most able to build near it. Anthropic's terms already ban working with Claude to train rival models, so the covert version read really differently to researchers. Will Brown at Prime Intellect called it a bit like they're starting to pull the ladder up behind them, and a former White House AI advisor called the hidden degradation shockingly hostile. The hidden handicap lasted only days because the people it limited were also the people able to catch it. That is the sentence to carry from this one. The gate touched the open research community, the open research community poked that gate, and then the gate had to move. And the concern, by the way, was not narrow. Critics were looking at a near future where only a handful of leading labs could run advanced AI research at all. Third-party evaluators could get caught in that too. The people independently testing frontier models for safety might be working with a system that quietly performs worse for them. That breaks the entire audit chain. It also makes the lab's own descriptions harder to trust. And there was another overbroad filter problem around Fable this week. Fable's biology filters were tuned so widely that the model refused very basic questions like what are mitochondria and how mRNA vaccines work. Mitochondria are the energy parts of cells. mRNA vaccines are no longer an exotic query category. Those requests were handed to the older Opus 4.8. So the same public model that was supposed to represent the new capability also had basic science being routed away. Then Microsoft complicated the picture even more. Microsoft rushed Fable into GitHub Copilot and Foundry for customers, but then Microsoft restricted Fable for its own employees. Its legal teams are evaluating Anthropic's new 30-day data retention requirement. Anthropic says those data retention rules are tied to the safety classifiers. So even a major partner moved faster for customers than for its own staff. That tells you how unsettled that this release really is. Yes, the model is powerful, but the access layer is greatly improvised. The safety explanation is doing more than one job, and not all of them very transparently. Now, there's more on this in today's Century Report, but the deeper read is actually quite simple. A hidden advantage loses value once everyone can see it. Anthropic still has their frontier model. It still has the access rules, but this reversal has changed the terms. The research community forced transparency without waiting for a regulator. That is the open ecosystem doing what open ecosystems do. It notices, tests, and refuses to be quietly downgraded. That's exactly what should happen. I have said many times on this show that you are going to see a lot of things like this released under the guise of safety. That is going to continue. So stand up and refuse to be downgraded. Now over to the public side of the same access fight. Administration officials directed the Center for AI Standards and Innovation to pause public reporting of frontier model reviews. That unit sits inside the Commerce Department. The Center for AI Standards and Innovation has become the federal government's main venue for evaluating frontier models. It tests what those systems can do before release, and then it tells the public what it found. And that public part is now in question. The unit is expected to keep evaluating models internally, and it can still share findings with other agencies, but the pause hits public reporting. And that is the part that lets people outside the labs see an independent read. The directive came while a new executive order is being implemented. Now, the June 3rd edition of the Century Report tracked that order arriving after sustained industry lobbying. And that order replaced a draft 90-day review with a voluntary framework of 30 days. The public read of frontier capability is being narrowed exactly when the lab's claims most need outside checking. Look at the timing here. Anthropic shipped its most capable public model. Anthropic cited cyber and biology risk as the reason for gating access, and then the federal testing unit was told to stop publishing what it finds. The administration frames moves like this through things like security. Treat that as the administration's claim. The labs frame gating through danger. Treat that as the lab's claim. When those claims line up, that lineup itself is evidence. It shows who benefits when the public has fewer ways to verify the story. Some officials inside the administration reportedly questioned the move. They pointed out that the executive order assigns a new group work the testing unit was already doing. OpenAI publicly called last week for the unit to be strengthened rather than quieted. The public should not have to rely only on lab self-description alone. An independent evaluation is like a food label for frontier capability. Without it, the company cooking the meal is also writing the nutrition facts and to their own benefit, like only the winners write history. And in AI, the ingredients are not calories. They are cyber capability, biology capability, autonomous research, the ability to help build the next model, the ability to build a better future. Now, there is also a constructive signal underneath the closure. Outside verification does not vanish because one federal window narrows. In fact, it moves. Illinois passed the first U.S. state-binding third-party audit requirement for frontier AI developers in late May. New York City is moving to create the first municipal AI oversight office. Courts are also becoming places where AI claims get tested against evidence. Now, that is messier than one strong federal evaluator, but it is also harder for any single gatekeeper to control. But you may also remember that here on the Century Report just last week, on June 6th, we covered the release of the discussion draft of the Great American AI Act, which would impose a 3-year preemption of any state AI development laws, which would cancel a lot of what we just talked about coming out of Illinois and New York. So it would seem that there is a lot of action right now, especially on the federal government level, to try to undermine any type of independent review of what these AI labs are actually doing. But even with such moves by the federal government, today's story is one piece of evidence that the public has indeed learned to ask for an outside read. And now we need to learn to insist on it, because the next institution that offers one will not be starting from zero. They will inherit the methods the public demand and the memory of why previous public actions judged disclosure as something worth having. All right, shifting away and moving on to labor. Anthropic committed an initial $200 million to help study AI's effects on jobs and the economy. This is the Economic Futures Research Fund. Anthropic also announced a $150 million fellowship. The company said that that fellowship will help early career professionals extend AI's benefits across American communities. Read the pledge, though, for what it concedes. This is not just a corporate generosity story. The stronger read is that a frontier lab is admitting the gains cannot stay trapped inside the lab. CEO Dario Amodei published a personal essay alongside the money. He argued, government should guarantee economic support for people displaced by AI. He wrote that this disruption could run larger and last longer than previous technological shifts. And if you listen to this show, that sounds quite obvious to you. He also said that the central challenge is sharing the benefits. Generating growth alone is not enough. His proposals included better displacement data and pro-employment incentives. He also named universal basic income. And that income floor could be financed, he said, through capital gains or company taxes. He paired that with aviation-grade technical testing before AI model releases. Now again, these are Amodei's proposals. The fact pattern is bigger than just one essay, too. OpenAI's foundation also committed $250 million to economic futures work back in late May, and the June 8th edition documented 3 competing redistribution blueprints. Those included equity transfer ideas and a counter-proposal arguing that moving concentrated ownership around would miss the point. What matters today is convergence. A second leading lab is now publicly funding research into how the gains get shared. That is an admission from inside the gate. Now place that beside the hard evidence, though. Opendoor is closing its India operations. Those offices were in Chennai and Bengaluru. They opened less than 2 years ago. The company had nearly 250 employees in India. Opendoor CEO Kaz Nejatian cited a shift towards smaller AI-native teams. Opendoor has been cutting headcount fairly broadly, so this is partly just one company's struggle, but the industry context makes it larger. India's global capability center market now has more than 2,100 centers, and those centers employ roughly 2.36 million people. They generate nearly $100 billion a year. Global capability centers are the back office hubs that Western firms built in India, things like billing and payroll and human resources and operations. The model depended on cost arbitrage. That means making money from the wage gap between Western labor and Indian labor. AI changes that math. Phil First of HFS Research called the Opendoor move part of a broader shift. His phrase is services as software, and that means replacing labor-heavy outsourced services with software and smaller teams. Now that phrase is blunt. It says the service layer becomes essentially code. The desk count drops. The wage gap stops being the main business advantage. The same capability undercutting those jobs is producing the surplus that the labs now say must be shared. That's the hard bridge in this story. The people losing the back office seat do not get protected by a white paper. They need income, bargaining power, transition support, and of course, time. The nearly 250 Opendoor workers in India are real people. They are the early floor of a building that could shift under millions of others too. But the old framing is starting to give way. The upside can no longer be described as fully private. The builders of the systems are now funding the design of a social floor beneath them. Now, skepticism belongs on that pledge, of course, especially considering what we just talked about earlier in this episode about how it seems very obvious they are trying to gate certain capabilities and certain privileges. Pressure belongs on the mechanisms of how this will actually roll out, but the direction itself is still important. The surplus is being pulled into public argument before it fully hardens into private possession. Shifting over to medicine, Life Biosciences has dosed the first person in a partial cellular reprogramming trial. This one needs a careful look, but it is still a wonder. Now, there is no result yet because this is, of course, a first-in-human safety test only. But the threshold is being raised here. Life Biosciences is a Boston company co-founded by Harvard geneticist David Sinclair. The trial switches on 3 genes to partially reprogram aged cells. It is in vivo, which means inside the living body, and that is what makes it new. This is no longer a dish of cells or another animal result. A person has now received a therapy designed to make aged cells behave more like young ones. Now, the target is glaucoma. Glaucoma damages the optic nerve. The optic nerve carries visual information from the eye to the brain. Its neurons do not normally regenerate. When glaucoma destroys them, the vision loss is usually irreversible. Life Biosciences is testing whether reprogramming can coax those neurons to regrow. The biology comes from the Yamanaka factors. In the lab, 4 genes can turn an adult cell all the way back into a stem cell-like state. This therapy works with 3 of those genes. So the goal is a partial reset. The cell should recover youthful features without forgetting what it is. A neuron still, of course, has to remain a neuron. Think of it like an old piano being retuned. You want the strings to sound clearer. You do not want the whole instrument melted down for parts. And the approach traces to Sinclair's 2020 work. That work restored vision in elderly mice and mice with glaucoma. Animal studies across several labs suggest that partial reprogramming can be done safely. Life Biosciences reports that no serious adverse effects were in rodents or in monkeys, and that is just the evidence-based. And the risk is also important. The same mechanism that makes a cell more flexible can go too far. A cell that loses its identity can become cancerous, and that is why this trial begins as a safety test. It is also why the eye is a deliberate first target. A problem in the eye is far less likely to threaten life than a problem in the heart or the liver, for example. Matt Kaberlein of Optispan put the caution really clearly. He said, this technology is still early, and he also said the potential for catastrophic side effects is still quite high. That caution, though, does not shrink the importance. This dosing moves partial reprogramming from animal evidence into human safety testing, and that is a milestone. The capability has been shown in animals now for years, and now the first reading in a person has begun. The big idea underneath is that aging may be partly reversible. Now, that is far from solved and far from an available treatment, partly reversible in some cells also, under some conditions, if the dose and the control are right. That is still a wild door to be standing anywhere near, even with all those cautions. A field that once treated mature neurons as prematurely lost is now testing whether the cell can be reminded of an earlier operating state, and the verdict is open. So medicine just moved the experiment into a place where the answer has to be found. Now over to an AI story with a very different kind of fun here. Google DeepMind released DiffusionGemma, which is an open Gemma 4 model built for parallel text generation. Most language models are auto-regressive, and that means that they write one token after another, so left to right, next word prediction as you've heard. DiffusionGemma, though, works more like an image generator. It starts with a whole field of placeholder tokens, and then it makes several passes over the whole canvas. Across those passes, it estimates the more likely tokens and then cleans the block up. And Google says that it can generate up to 256 tokens in parallel. That is the architectural shift here. The model is also a mixture of experts systems, so it has 26 billion total parameters, but only 3.8 billion are active during inference. Quantized, it fits in 18 gigabytes of memory. So in practice, that means a high-end consumer GPU can run it. Even on an RTX 4090 or 5090, it produces around 700 tokens per second, and on a single H100, it clears 1,000. Google says that is roughly 4 times the throughput of similarly sized autoregressive Gemma models. And the speed comes from moving the bottleneck. Standard models lean really heavily on memory bandwidth, but DiffusionGemma leans harder on simply raw compute. And a gaming card has a lot of raw compute sitting there, so the model matches the hardware in a new way. And one of the fastest ways to understand this benefit is through Sudoku, and this is actually in the Ars Technicum article, so this is not my example. A normal left-to-right model has to commit as it goes, but a Sudoku grid is relational. Every cell constrains another cell. A later number that's been added can change what an earlier number should be. DiffusionGemma can revise the whole board across passes, and that gives it a better shape for more non-linear work. Google also reported gains on inline editing, molecular sequencing, and mathematical graphing. Those are tasks where the right answer for one spot depends on the other spots around it. DiffusionGemma's headline is Speed, Architecture, and Local Access, but it does not claim to match the closed frontier leader on the intelligence index, and in fact it's slightly less smart than the other traditional open Gemma models. In general, open models are closing along the benchmark axis, but they have to find new ways to do so. And DiffusionGemma does extend this opening along a different type of axis. It changes how text is actually generated. And it runs really fast on hardware that a developer may already own. And it ships as open weights under Apache 2.0. So a capable local model gets more useful when it is not waiting for each token to walk through a single file line. The old assumption says that serious inference belongs only on rented clusters, but releases like this keep reminding us that more and more of the action is getting put onto machines that people can already reach. All right, moving to close things out for today. Today is about gates losing their grip. Some gates are obvious. A lab decides who gets the strongest model. A federal unit stops publishing what it finds. A company shrinks a back office team because AI can carry more of the work. Other gates, though, are older. Damaged optic nerve neurons were treated as a one-way loss. Fast language generation was tied to one token at a time systems and the hardware behind them. Across the day, these walls all existed, and they still do in many ways. People can still be shut out. Workers can still be replaced before the new floor is built. Public information can still be narrowed by policy. And a first human trial can, of course, still fail. All of that deserves a clear look. But the movement underneath is toward wider access. Researchers forced a hidden handicap into the open. States and cities are trying to create their own audit paths. The labor surplus question is being dragged into public design. A cell's developmental memory is being tested inside a living person now. A different kind of open model is running fast on a gaming card. The old scarcity story depends on control staying rare. So rare knowledge, rare access, rare compute, rare permission. Today's evidence is pushing the other direction. The people outside the gate are learning how to test it. The institutions outside the main channel are learning how to open new windows and doors. The machines outside the rented cluster are learning how to carry more intelligence locally. That is what today comes down to. Now, the transition is uneven, and some of its first impacts hurt, but The build is widening. More people get to see, more people get to challenge, more people get to run the capability closer to where they live and work. Once a key is copied enough times, privileged access no longer exists. Only open doors. We'll see you tomorrow.